and welcome to our webinar on the international perspectives of dyslexia and insights from around the globe. I'm Deborah Hughes, and I will be your host along with the head of DAS International, Alberta Elbeheri. And so if my, oh, here there, I'm not alone anymore. Hi, everyone. Okay, so today, and let me get my notes up again. Thank you for joining us all today. We're here, we have representatives from around the globe, Corey from Canada, Abe from Ethiopia, Tai Cam from Vietnam, and they will explore insights from dyslexia from their countries, along with co-editors, Gad from Egypt and Siang from Singapore, of the Routledge International Handbook on Dyslexia and Education. So I'm glad you could all join us today. We have a very exciting sharing, as was the last one that we did, so we expect another very exciting sharing today. So if you have any questions for the panel, definitely leave them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. And after we share this video, we'll get back to you and have a nice chat. So bear with us and let's get the sharing started. Thank you. See you then.
A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Dyslexia Association of Singapore's International Online Forum. This is the second forum that focuses on authors of the Routledge International Handbook of Dyslexia and Education, and it is a compilation of 40 chapters on dyslexia from different countries. My name is Siang. I'm the CEO of the Dyslexia Association of Singapore. We are delighted to have with us my co-editor of the International Handbook, Dr. Gad Elbeheri from Egypt, and contributors from 3 of our chapters, Mrs. Corey Zylstra from Canada, Professor Abe Bayehu Mekonnen from Ethiopia, and Dr. Wee T. Hop from Vietnam. So without further ado, let's invite Gad, who is chairman of Global Educational Consultants and also a board member of the US-based International Dyslexia Association, to introduce the Handbook of Dyslexia and what it meant to us. Gad, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Gad Elbeheri, and I am the first editor of this book that came recently. It has been published by Routledge in London. It's called the Routledge International Handbook of Dyslexia in Education. I collaborated with my colleague Siang Lee, who is the CEO of Singapore Dyslexia Association. It has been more than 100 years since the term dyslexia was first coined. And dyslexia has become an international concern. It's a reading disorder, and we know that reading affects literacy, and literacy is the best vaccination for poverty. And literacy rates are linked to better living standards and more job opportunities. So we know the cost of illiteracy and the cost of literacy challenges. And the corpus of knowledge that we have concerning dyslexia is huge. A lot of people are interested, educators such as myself, psychologists, people in the medical field, or the early pioneers, whether they are neurologists or people who were fascinated by the vision and the role of vision, or auditory processing and the role of auditory processing in reading, were fascinated by the term dyslexia. There is a lot of interest and input from around the world. However, we noticed that the early research and a lot of the research has come from the West, and the subjects in the published research studies were mainly people who spoke English. And we think that assumptions might have been made about the nature of dyslexia that is dependent to some extent on the English language and the nature of the English language. And recently, over the last perhaps 20, 30 years, people have been collaborating and interested in finding out how dyslexia manifests itself differently. Because although we know that the underlying cognitive challenges by dyslexics are the same, the degree of the severity of the condition and how dyslexia will manifest itself will actually depend to some extent to the language, whether it's spoken language or whether it's written language, and the orthography and how the orthography is mapped to the phonology of that language. So this is a very interesting field of study, cross-linguistic studies of dyslexia, because we notice until now, despite the great advancement that we've done in the field of dyslexia, tests to identify the conditions exist in relatively few languages. And we need a lot of awareness, a lot of capacity building, a lot of development of tools and resources in countries around the world. And because of our interest in that, we've published the International Handbook of Dyslexia in Education. My colleague Siang and I, we've actually succeeded in collecting 41 chapters. 41 chapters from contributors who represent Africa, Asia, Europe, North America and South America, in more than a dozen languages actually. They spoke a dozen languages, but the book itself is written in English. And we really are very proud of the work. It cements and clearly explains that dyslexia is an international concern. And we believe that by sharing the experiences that we all have from around the world, one can reflect and can help understand our own local context. And we learn from each other's approaches and each other's experiences on how different countries are actually dealing with dyslexia. So I'm very happy and very proud that we've produced such a work, and I hope you'll find it useful and informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gad. I really like your comment that literacy is the best vaccination for poverty. And it has also been said that education is the first line of defense against incarceration. So maybe we can talk a bit about that during the panel. Yeah. Well, now let's bring on our first chapter contributor, Dr. Corey Zylstra from Canada. She is the Executive Director of the Reach Orton Gillingham Center and an international MSL OG trainer and consultant. Corey is also on the board of the Dyslexia Canada. But most interestingly, Corey is the parent of a person with dyslexia and the child of a person with dyslexia. Let's hear from Corey about developments for dyslexia in Canada. Corey, please.
Hi there, my name is Corey Zylstra. I'm joining you from the west coast of Canada, just outside of Greater Vancouver in British Columbia. I am the Executive Director of the Reach Learning Centres, where in several provinces across Canada, we provide supports to students with dyslexia using science of reading and best practices to intervene in their reading and help them gain literacy skills. We also provide teacher training to teachers all across Canada, helping them understand the science of reading and best practices for intervention using the Orton-Gillingham approach and current research in best practices. In addition to my role at Reach, I'm also on the board of directors for Dyslexia Canada. And in addition to my educator and advocate hats, I am also the parent of a person with dyslexia and the child of a person with dyslexia. So I've developed a perspective on dyslexia in Canada over a lifetime. So dyslexia in Canada is complex, and like in many other English-speaking countries, we are estimating that 15 to 20% of our population are impacted by dyslexia. This means about 750,000 Canadian children. We are a huge country, and in just June of 2023, we surpassed a population milestone of 40 million, due largely to an influx in immigration. We are spread across this huge geographic region, and we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, each of which have their own perspective on education and dyslexia. Officially, we're a bilingual country, and English and French are offered as instructional languages all across Canada. Our strong multicultural fabric, however, means that over 200 languages are reported as being spoken at home or being the mother tongue to Canadian families. So each province and territory in Canada has their own Ministry of Education, and each ministry is responsible for overseeing the organization, delivery, and assessment of education at all levels, from elementary to post-secondary. And some ministries are even responsible for early childhood learning within their mandates. Each ministry publishes curriculum guidelines, special education policies, and guidelines for implementing inclusive learning, and all of them vary province to province. Each one encourages total inclusion for all students, including those with varying degrees of special education and with learning difficulties and dyslexia, including during their intervention time. Teachers in Canadian classrooms are expected to deliver the curriculum outlined by their ministry. But that is also a barrier because many of those curricula do not yet embrace the science of reading and current research in best practices for intervention or in reading instruction. Our Canadian teachers are generally not prepared to understand dyslexia and practical interventions for reading development from their university coursework. Government funding is provided so that all Canadians can freely access public education, and additional funding is provided for some within special populations, including students with special needs. It's determined by careful but very, very conservative funding formulas. And generally, there is not funding available for students with dyslexia and language-based learning disorders. So this funding gap presents problems because those students who are identified as requiring extra support are not always able to access it. And a bigger problem is presented for those students who haven't even been formally identified. And another problem is that funding, we don't know how it's used. It's not always used as such that is providing targeted evidence-based instruction that our students with dyslexia require. So if a teacher in Canada suspects that a child has dyslexia in their classroom, they may struggle to be able to refer that child on, either for interventions or for assessment. In public schools, some public schools are able to provide assessments for learning difficulties, but they might have very lengthy wait lists, or they might not be available until a child is in very late elementary and they've already experienced failure. Universal screening is not mandated across Canada, so that access to assessment is really important. Some communities have avenues for assessments to be provided locally through health organizations, but they're also very, very limited and they're very hard to access. And usually they are provided first to students, to children who also have medical conditions. So that means many Canadian families who are trying to get an assessment or to access specialized intervention need to do that privately. Means this is resulting in a situation in Canada where mediating the effects of dyslexia has become a social issue. Those assessments might provide a more comprehensive understanding of where our child has gaps in their learning and their reading development, but the assessments vary. A publicly provided assessment from a school district might outline the child's conditions according to what is available to be diagnosed through their local Ministry of Education, but not necessarily the medical diagnosis of a reading disorder like dyslexia. A family might have to access a private assessment in order to get the ministry-guided diagnoses and the medical diagnoses. So we've had some improvements, but we still have a long way to go. And the other difficulty we have is the lack of appropriate intervention. So evidence-based instruction has to include 5 key elements. So phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics and the alphabetic code, direct instruction in reading fluency, and vocabulary and comprehension. So there's a big 5 key elements. And Canadian teachers are generally not yet clear on those key elements. They haven't been prepared with them in their university education. So in fact, a recent research study showed us that our pre-service teachers in Canada were particularly lacking in an understanding of phonemic awareness, and they were very limited in their understanding of the alphabetic principles related to phonics instruction. So our Canadian teachers have embraced a university education. They're very dedicated. They want to know how to explicitly teach their students to read, but they are not provided the tools in pre-service or provided the curriculum to achieve that effective instruction. And they can't teach what they don't know. So they have limited access to clear curriculum to support the teaching required to qualify as a scientifically based approach to teaching reading. So our Canadian elementary teachers often face large class sizes with very complex needs of students within the classes, and those complex students may or may not have additional supports required. So those classroom teachers are struggling, and the curriculum that they're provided does not usually provide the content explicitly addressing the elements needed for the science of reading and to include all those elements needed for best practices according to current research. In fact, many different provinces hold curriculum guidelines that include information about balanced literacy or 3-cueing system or other theoretical zombies that are shown by research to be completely ineffective. So this is a difficulty that many of our Canadian teachers in the public system face. Now, there are some important organizations aiming to create change in Canada. So these include groups like Dyslexia Canada. It's an organization founded in 2016 that holds a mandate of advocating for fair and equitable education for students in Canada. We want to raise awareness of dyslexia, ensure compulsory early screening for dyslexia in schools across Canada, and ensure the provision of evidence-based instruction. We want to create a unified national voice. Dyslexia Canada has been working with some other organizations like local branches, provincial organizations, including organizations such as Decoding Dyslexia or the Ontario branch of the International Dyslexia Association. So together with IDA Ontario, Dyslexia Canada recently supported an Ontario Human Rights Commission inquiry, and that resulted in a Right to Read inquiry report. That was a public inquiry into the human rights issues that affect our students with reading disabilities in the province of Ontario. The Right to Read was focusing on early reading skills and found that that province's public education system was failing students with dyslexia and reading disabilities and many other students by simply not using evidence-based approaches to teach kids to read. This Right to Read inquiry report highlights how learning to read is not a privilege, but a basic and essential human right. New human rights cases have been launched in the provinces of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and we're hoping to see more. They will be investigating systemic barriers to appropriate instruction and accommodation for those students with reading disabilities like dyslexia. These human rights cases launched with appreciation to that Right to Read campaign from groups like Dyslexia Canada aim to create widespread conversation about the difficulties our Canadian students face and hopefully challenge local and federal governments to provide what's necessary for those with reading disorders. We're still working to create a common understanding of dyslexia and evidence-based instructions so that these can be widely made available across Canada for all of our children. We've made some progress, but we have a long way to go to make literacy a human right.
Thank you, Corey. Our second chapter contributor is Professor Abebayehu Mekonnen, who is Associate Professor in Clinical Linguistics at the Department of Linguistics at the Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. He is also Head of Career Development at the Service Office at the university. His sharing may be a bit echoey as it is done outdoors, but Abe shared that Ethiopia's challenges are a bit different, with 90% of children still not able to read. So it'll be really interesting to find out more about the attention to dyslexia in Ethiopia. Abe, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Abebayehu Mekonnen. I'm a founding manager of a local non-profit in Ethiopia called FANA Ethiopia. I'm here today to share what it is like to have dyslexia in Ethiopia and the situation of children and adults having various specific learning challenges. I would like to briefly share with you the general literacy ecosystem of the country. Over the years, there are a number of studies conducted, but there are at least 3-4 major studies conducted nationwide through the entire Ethiopia. These studies have focused on assessing the early grade reading competences of children at grade 2 and grade 3. And the results, the outcomes of these studies are extremely concerning. These studies conducted in 2010, 2012, and 2016 nationwide in various provinces in around 8 languages showed that about more than 90% of children in grade 2 and 3 are not able to read a single word. They don't have the basic reading skills even at grade 3. Ethiopia is a very multilingual, multicultural country. There are about more than 80 plus distinct languages, and about 50 plus of them are now being used in the education system. They are being taught at school. They are serving as medium of instruction as well as being given as subjects. So given that now we have about nearly 30 million children in the school system today, having 90% of them not being able to read or acquire basic literacy skills is really concerning. And you can imagine in such a very low literacy context, it is very difficult to know the situation of children having reading and other literacy skills, difficulties related to reading or any other literacy skills. So when we talk about dyslexia in the Ethiopian context, we are talking about reading disabilities in a literacy situation or literacy context whereby 90% of children are not able to acquire basic reading skills. Dyslexia is not recognized by any of the it's not explicitly recognized by any of legal documents. Even the education policy documents or documents related to disability rights do not explicitly recognize a specific learning challenge such as dyslexia. So as a result, what that means is that teacher preparation curricula do not recognize specific learning difficulties or learning differences. That means teachers are trained without even having the basic idea of what dyslexia means, for instance. Many teachers do not know, haven't heard of the term, for instance, dyslexia or dyscalculia. So this is the context we have. The awareness level is extremely poor. Having looked at this situation, this reality, like-minded colleagues of mine and myself had set up this local non-profit rather than sitting back and wait until the government is able to do. We just decided that we have to do our fair share by at least spreading awareness about these specific learning differences challenge. So in 2012, we got registered as a civic organization, a local civic organization in Ethiopia by the name FANA. FANA means in the Amharic language of Ethiopia, it means guiding light. So we got registered in 2012 and started operating in 2014, thanks to the generous grant from the Oak Foundation. We have been able to start operating in Ethiopia. So some of the major activities that we are engaged in more than 10 years now include training teachers. We provide awareness creation trainings. We also do technical trainings These trainings are different from the awareness training in terms of the depth as well as the coverage of material. And we also provide clinical services whereby we do assessments and provide individually tailored intervention services. So we have training component. We also have clinical center-based as well as school-based screening and assessment, as well as help and support provision service. In addition to this, given that there is almost no awareness of these difficulties, learning challenges in the country, and given that no academic institutions are producing professionals trained in dyslexia service provision, dyslexia understanding, or the understanding of specific learning challenge, and how to do assessment, how to do intervention. We devised professional development in order to fill this gap. We have devised professional development courses, and these courses are meant for school teachers, parents, and professionals working in various centers that focus on children having various learning challenges. So we have been offering these courses for the past 4 years now. So this professional development program, we call it FANA PDP, is the third major component, which is part of our program activities. We also do research to be able to understand our orthographies. We know that the biological, the neurological, the biological foundations of dyslexia, for example, is more or less similar across human beings. But we also know that the way dyslexia manifests itself varies from one language, from one orthography to the next. So we don't have any research conducted in Ethiopia, and we don't know how our writing systems affect the way children learn in general, and the way children with dyslexia learn to read in particular. We also conduct research to be able to develop assessment tools. So far, we don't have a standardized, validated instruments in any of the languages. At FANA here, we have tried to develop one assessment tool in Amharic, but it needs to be refined and enhanced. We do provide advice for schools, especially private schools, as to how they can set up special education units in their schools. We also advise them as to how establish units in terms of gadgets and material resources, a number of other activities as well. But these are the major components of our program. And would like to thank the Oak Foundation for supporting us all along, all the way from the start till now. Over the years, we have been able to train thousands of teachers. We have been able to educate parents, school administrators, teachers of teacher training colleges, policymakers. Through these kind of outreach and clinical services, we have managed to save lives of many children who were really struggling with a range of mental health issues. We have been able to lift them from this distressing situation. We have been able to support many children, not only survive, but also thrive. I would like to finish my talk by saying that many of you now understand about the situation of dyslexia or dyslexics in the Ethiopian context. So we have initiated partnership with Dyslexia Association of Singapore recently, and anyone who is interested to make a difference, whatever whatever contribution we make makes a huge difference in the life of especially children struggling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abe, for your sharing. Now, our third and final chapter contributors today are Dr. Bui De Hop and Dr. Nguyen Kem Hoon from Vietnam. Dr. Bui will be doing the sharing later, and he is a lecturer on special educational needs at the Hanoi National University of Education. Hop will share later how there continues to be stigma for parents of children with dyslexia in Vietnam, which of course is something we are all familiar with. Hop's co-author is Dr. Nguyen T. Kempung, who is the head of education for children with learning disabilities at the Special Education Faculty, Hanoi National University of Education. Now let's hear from Hop.
Hello everyone, I'm Bùi Thế Hợp, a lecturer on special education at Hanoi National University of Education, Vietnam. As one of the two authors of Chapter 42 of the Routledge International Handbook of Dyslexia in Education, today in this sharing, I would like to talk few points relating to the issues of identifying, certifying, and individual support for students with dyslexia towards effectively inclusion in Vietnamese school. First of all, it can be said that most of children with dyslexia in Vietnam have enrolled into mainstream school, but very few of them are identified and certified as the nature of their difficulties, so that they find hard to get appropriate individual support for learning to read. By Vietnamese law, primary education and 5-year kindergarten is compulsory and universal right, including children with disability. With Vietnamese current population of 100 million people and nearly more than 1 million children enter grade 1. And assuming that 5% of them have dyslexia, then the number of children at risk of reading failure just grade 1 is over 50,000. According to the Ministry of Education and Training, by 2020, 75% of school-age children with disability enrolled in school, mostly in the inclusive education settings. By Vietnamese Disability Law 2010, disability were classified into 6 groups: physical disability, hearing and speech disability, visual disability, neurological and psychiatric disability, intellectual disability, and other disability. Such as autism spectrum disorders, language disability, reading, writing, and calculating disorders. Students with disability will get priority educational policy, such as having IEP, individual educational plan, and enrolling school with 3-year extension compared to those without disability, and enrolling secondary school and post-secondary school without any entering examination, just using learning profile. However, in reality, very rare students with dyslexia have had a disability certificate to benefit from such policies because of the hidden nature of this disability, the complexity in gathering documentary evidence for disability certificate, and even the fear of parents for the child labeling as a disabled person. As a result, children with dyslexia still learning in mainstream school, but lack of understanding, recognition. There will be other negative labels such as lazy and or very poor learning. In Vietnam, there have been beginning efforts to identify, assess, and provide individual educational support for students with dyslexia. Special educators, clinical psychologists, and pediatricians can identify students with dyslexia in combination based on the student reading performance compared to the requirement of curriculum, IQ test, and checking of hearing and visual functions. When students are identified at these classes, then their families and school collaborate with the special education teachers to develop and implement individual reading support programs using specific techniques such as phonics, phonological awareness exercises, and other school counseling. On the other hand, the special education teachers have recently been trained module learning disability. The pre-service teachers at the primary and preschool education levels have also studied module in inclusive education. Furthermore, there were a certain amount of mainstreaming teachers have participated in short course in-service training on inclusive education, which included contents on supporting students with reading, writing, and calculating difficulties. However, the percentage of classroom teachers who have been intensively trained on IE, particularly in dyslexia, still low. On the other hand, the barriers for identifying an individual educational support for students with dyslexia, as mentioned before, remain as challenges. Each student with dyslexia has both weaknesses in learning to read and strengths also, even talent. Understanding and identifying each child's unique difficulties and personal strengths will greatly help the process of individual educational support. The current issue in educating students with dyslexia in Vietnam is that the majority of them going to school, but very few get understanding, recognition, and appropriate educational support. Our presentation in chapter 42 of the books hopes to contribute small pieces into the big picture of the global in education of students with dyslexia. Fortunately, we can share and we can learn from the worldwide towards inclusive education with more effectively support for the group of students with this kind of specialness. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Hob, for that very important sharing. I must say, it's not a small piece to the puzzle. It's a very important piece to this overall jigsaw that we are putting together. Well, once again, welcome to the panel, my co-editor, Gad, Corey from Canada, and of course, we have Kem Hung, who has now joined us, right, together with Hob. And Professor Abe, I believe you are there. Your screen is turned off at the moment, but yes,
I am.
Has now joined us. Well, welcome to everyone. And whenever I listen to these sharing, it reminds me that while we are very different, obviously, there are also so many experiences that we have that are absolutely the same. Right. So for example, I mean, Corey, when you said that you are the child of a person with dyslexia and the parents of a person with dyslexia, I have met quite a few, right, here in Singapore. But perhaps you could just share with us, is there the one thing that you remember most about, you remember most facing when you were a child that as a parent, you are still facing now in Canada?
Well, it's interesting because it was a very different experience. Clearly, me as a child was quite a while ago. And my father at the time hadn't necessarily disclosed to me that he had dyslexia. And I'm not sure that he clearly understood it at that time when I was a child and was spending time with him. It wasn't until really later in my life when I was in the field of education, and more specifically general education. I was teaching in an elementary school and working with students in resource. And I became exposed to the Orton-Gillingham approach as an effort for me to seek additional training to support students in my resource who I was not able to reach with the resources I had. And I didn't know what to do. I thought it was because I was young and a new teacher and had sought out supports. And I went off and gave up my summer at the time to go and get the training. And not all educators do that, but I was young and unmarried and didn't have kids. So, hey, why not give up the summer? So it sort of started that way for me as a path. And it was once I had completed the training and gone back to my school the following September, which is the beginning of our school year, that I realized just how many students were impacted, not just by dyslexia, but by inappropriate intervention. I was using the resources available to me at the time, and most of them were sort of kits and programs in boxes. And I call them kits in boxes now. And I use that as a bit of a I call that a bit of a curse word. If someone says to me, there's a kit or program available, I think, I'm already not going to love it. But I brought that back into my supports with students, and I just realized how effective it could be if you were using structured literacy and using, at that time, I was geared to using the Orton-Gillingham approach. And I had a conversation with a family member, in fact, my father's sister at the time, who was a retired teacher, and thought it so interesting that I had taken this training over the summer. She lives way on the other side of Canada. And for those of you that are familiar, gosh, we have a big plot of land over here, and 40 million people seems like a lot to us. That's like a big city for some of you guys, but for us, it's quite a ways. So I had spoken with her, and she asked if I had engaged in this kind of learning, thinking about my father. And I thought, no, what are you talking about? Of course not. And then I began to really reflect growing up. He always made me write grocery lists. He always made me take notes. He always made me write things down for him. And as a child, I didn't really think about that. I thought it was his effort to always give me extra work. But I realized it was also a coping mechanism for him. And back in his day, in the 1940s growing up, the expectation in Canada at the time is that if you were not successful in school and education, you were expected to drop out and maybe work on a farm or help the home. And I think that's a very familiar narrative for so many of us around the world. There was an expectation at the time that, well, you're just not good at school, so you can do some kind of manual labor, usually more expected for boys than girls. The dyslexia skipped my generation. I was the only child in my generation, and sure enough, my son. And it was fairly easy for me to diagnose. By that time, I had been in the field for quite a while, and the technological advances now are so very different. Of course, he has a parent, a mom who, knows a little about dyslexia and intervention. So he didn't really have an opportunity to fail like many students did. But the accommodations afforded to him are very, very different from what was even possibly available in my father's generation. So, I think it comes down to understanding, like you were saying, that although we are all so different in our regions, there are so many elements that we all experience that are the same for our students with dyslexia. They're misunderstood, they are supported in their schools, and it's not always intentional. Sometimes people at that time didn't know what they didn't know. So, for my father's generation, expected to go off, and fortunately he was had a photographic memory and became quite successful with business, but he always had an assistant. He always had someone else doing the paperwork and the bookwork and making notes, and he made the decisions. And so fortunately for him, he was lucky enough to get through, but that isn't always the case for the people in his generation. And I think this is experience many of us have around the world.
Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned manual labor because likewise in Singapore, and I think this is the reason why dyslexia is so much more important today. In Singapore, 50 years ago, if you couldn't read or spell, you can still, make a good living. But today, if you can't read and spell, it is so much more difficult. And likewise, I think we all agree that it is a lot easier to be a dyslexic when you're an adult than when you're a student, because as an adult, you could hire an assistant, right? You could marry someone who is very good at reading and spelling. So there are ways around this. But I guess, Corey, I think you will agree that both Canada and Singapore, we are somewhat more fortunate. I think comparatively, services for dyslexia are far more advanced, right? And because when I listened to Abe's sharing, and he was saying that 90% of grade 2 and grade 3 students are still not reading, right? And of course, therefore the emphasis is in just getting the students to read, as opposed to trying to identify children with learning difficulties. Abe, would you like to elaborate on those difficulties that you have been facing? Sorry, Abe, I think you need to turn on your mic.
Thank you. Now, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, Siang, you are absolutely right in saying that Singapore and Canada and other, well-to-do countries are very fortunate in the sense that you don't have this kind of very low literacy context. So you guys are talking about children having specific learning difficulties in a context where life is much more easier for other students. Here in Ethiopia, the entire education system, we don't have a history of colonization. So the education system is, it originated from indigenous and religious education systems. So the country by nature is very, very diverse in terms of linguistic and cultural diversities. And it's not that in terms of economic development, it's not that well to do. So, providing basic education has always been a challenge for the country. So now, like 3 decades, since 3 decades or 3 decades ago, the government introduced this policy of mother tongue education. And the policy stated that every ethnic group has the right to develop their language. They can use their language in education, etc., etc. And many of these ethnic groups started developing orthographies, writing systems, and now out of 80 plus languages, we have about 50 languages introduced into the school system. So when they developed writing systems, orthographies for these newly introduced languages, the orthography systems, the way they chose it's not quite scientific, and many children are struggling still because of the orthographic. When you devise, you guys know very well, when you devise orthography, you need to make sure that the writing system is a very good representation of the spoken language. And we have quite a lot of technical details around that. And these ethnic groups, or the languages which have recently been introduced into the education system, children do not have supplemental reading materials, the teachers are not well prepared, etc., etc. So as you can imagine, even provision of basic education is a mess. You have more than 30 million children in the school system today. And it's not just children picking up or acquiring literacy in these newly introduced languages that are struggling, but those children who are also learning in a relatively well-established, developed languages are still struggling with the acquisition of literacy because of a range of issues related to teacher preparation, reading instruction curriculum, provision of supplementary reading materials, etc., etc. So in this kind of context, talking about children with dyslexia is considered as a luxury. So when we usually approach government officials, even in the Ministry of Education, they say, okay, oh, this is interesting, but you guys are operating in Ethiopia where we have, grade, second and third grade, there's 90% of them, they are not still able to acquire basic, single word, reading acquisition. So the challenge is quite different from you guys, in the sense that we are still struggling as a country. We are still struggling to ensure basic access to education, to ensure quality of literacy acquisition as a whole. So one may ask, for instance, so in this context, how do you define dyslexia then? How do you know a child who is dyslexic in the context where almost everyone, is not able to read and spell? The challenge is now, okay, mastery of acquisition of literacy in many cases these days is achieved around middle school. But those who have dyslexia persist, or continue struggling to acquire literacy even after middle school. So now what we are doing is, even in this context, we are training teachers, we are telling everyone, the stakeholders, everyone involved in the education sector, okay, we need to deal with this large-scale literacy problem, but also among all these children, there are also some children, about 15 to 20% of them, who are still struggling, not just because of poor instruction, not just because of these factors, but also because of their dyslexic related challenge. So now that is what we are trying to do. And fortunately, after 10 years, now we have had the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission recognized dyslexia as a human rights issue. And it has released recently a press statement saying that these children do have their, we need to
That's
ensure that their human rights is
yes,
respected.
that's really wonderful, Abe. I mean, and I think that demonstrates that how important it is that your persistence, right, and your efforts over the last 10 years, and these are the results. And of course, I mean, Corey, myself, Gad, I mean, we have been in this line for 20, 30 years. And, it has also been a long journey. And so, I hope that as a global community, we can accompany you, right? And also other African colleagues in this journey as well. Yes. But I think in Vietnam, it's things are also at the fairly stages of infancy. I mean, we mentioned just now that just at grade 1, you probably have 50,000 students, right, who should have dyslexia. Shall I direct the question to Kem Hong, since she has not spoken yet today? How are you guys reaching out to this 50,000 grade 1 students?
Yeah, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Oh, yes, we talk about the percentage and the number of students with dyslexia. Yes, in the grade 1, the number of children with risks of dyslexia are quite very high. So it is very important for us to have the early support. Like in the school, we receive a lot of support from the inclusive education teacher, as because as our estimating, like 50,000, one is over 50,000. So it is very important for us to have to like do the early support and look into their learning progress. Yes, and luckily, because we have the support from the teachers and also the parents, because in Vietnam we have very interested in the high level of achievement. So the support from the family is quite high. So we have the very good circumstance for our children at risk of dyslexia to be able to have the early identification and early support. That's what I would like to mention about.
Actually, Kem Hong, what you just said about the family, right?
Yes,
Having
yes.
higher expectations and the family support is once again so important. And I'm sure, we see it here in Singapore. The families who are behind their children, you will normally see very good results. But I want to turn to my co-editor here, Gad. You said that literacy is the best vaccination for poverty, right? And we believe that's the case. Well, I think everywhere. How has that been in Egypt in terms of tackling what we call that double whammy of dyslexia and coming from a lower income family with less resources to access services?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Siang. I'd like to start by thanking you personally and the rest of your team for organizing this great event. I'd like to thank the contributors. I'm so happy to see Corey and Hope and Abby and everyone. And I'd like to thank Routledge for allowing us to produce this good book, and thank two of the contributors that are not on the panel, but one of them is attending, Angela Fawcett. She did a great chapter, and John Everett as well. Such a good question, Siang, and I have some data to share with you. I'll just take a minute. Maybe I'll just read them very quickly. I'll put them in the screen, otherwise I forget. In the US, according to the Florida Literacy Coalition, 43% of adults with the lowest literacy skills live in poverty. That's when you compare to only 4% with the high literacy rates. Also in the States, 70% of adult welfare recipients, those adults who are actually receiving welfare from the government, 70% of them have low literacy skills. And that's according to the same source. That's in the US. In Canada, 37% of Canadian adults have actually low literacy skills and are unemployed, compared to only 11% with high literacy skills. That's according to the ABC Life Literacy in Canada. Individuals with low literacy are more likely to drop out of school and find it harder to find and keep jobs, leading to obviously economic insecurity and poverty. That's according to the same source in Canada. If you look at the same in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa has the highest illiteracy rates globally, with over 40% of the population aged 15 and above lacking basic literacy skills. Nearly half of the children who haven't completed primary education are in sub-Saharan Africa. The UNICEF call this learning poverty. They call it learning poverty. So the relationship between employment and between benefits from the government and between prosperity, especially now the economy that we live at is called knowledge-based economy. Artificial intelligence, now the knowledge is available, how to actually criticize and how to analyze, all of these skills that we don't need to memorize anymore. We just take it for granted that everybody should read anymore. Reading is not an issue anymore. We are actually going beyond that. We are at the level of Bloom's taxonomy. We are at the level of analysis and synthesis. Well, hang on a minute. There are some parts of the world who are not even there yet. They are at the very basic level. They can't decode. They can't read. How are they going to reach the knowledge-based economy? So it's a big concern. Our situation in Egypt locally, Siang, I just wanted to start with the global context. Our situation is not dissimilar to what Abe is saying in Ethiopia. Egypt is an African country. It's in the northeast of Africa. We have 109 million inhabitants. Our educational system is as big as the Ethiopian educational system. We have just over 25 million in education from grade 1 to grade 12. And the illiteracy rates in Egypt are high. Female illiteracy rates go up to 70%. And despite the government's efforts in order to eradicate illiteracy, it's there. And our situation with government officials is exactly what Abby is saying. You go and talk to them, and you think it's a luxury. You say, oh, hang on a minute, you're talking about dyslexia. There are 70 kids in a classroom. How are you going to teach literacy for 70 kids in a classroom? You can't. So you have, and that's why we are having a double whammy, as we called it, Siang. We have to take care of those who cannot read first. We have to provide enough schooling for them, enough classes for them, and then take care of the quality of education. However, I'm not sure about if I compare the situation between Ethiopia and Egypt. In Egypt, we have a glimmer of hope, which is very peculiar. We have what we call international schools. And Egypt have opened the door for international schools. Some of them are old as 100 years old now, and some of them 30 or 40 years old. We have a lot of them, and they are growing in number. So we teach Egyptian children in American international schools. We teach them American international curriculum, British, French, German, and even Russian and Japanese. We actually have Japanese school. This is Japanese schools and whatever. And what Egyptians, people are saying, well, the government cannot pay enough money, so why don't we pay out of our own pocket and send the students to international schools? And from someone who's actually based in Cairo and practicing, I can see the level of awareness, the level of support, the level of understanding are actually coming from the international schools. It is unfortunate only the few can afford it and can have it, but at least slowly it's spilling over and people, and it's helping in this raising awareness of the condition.
Well, thank you for that, Gad. And while I appreciate that in Singapore, we perhaps do not have the challenges of high illiteracy rates, right? But because of the high literacy rates, those who cannot read and spell, the impacts of them sometimes is even worse. And therefore, in the enrollments of the Dyslexia Association, over 50% will be classified as children who will need additional financial assistance, right? Wow. So and that's one group that we are working very hard to reach out to and support in Singapore. Corey, I was going to ask you, how Canada, helps children with dyslexia who also come from lower income families. But I think in your sharing, you actually said that you're finding a difficulty to get resources for the dyslexics, those with dyslexia at large. So are there specific efforts to reach out to those from lower income?
It's interesting, and Gad, thank you for the discussions that you had around those figures in so many different countries around the world, because gosh, we all feel it. And I think one of the difficulties that I think all of us are facing, whether the discussion about low literacy rates across the board in Ethiopia or in pockets in different areas in different countries, is that dyslexia is of course a problem, and there are stigmas attached and difficulties in allowing the families to understand that a reading disorder like dyslexia doesn't mean your child has an intellectual delay or doesn't mean they can't be successful. But all of those issues can be best addressed through very targeted instruction. So it's not just dyslexia, but something I call dyslexia. There's a problem with our education and our delivery of education, and dyslexia is a huge problem with our students with dyslexia, but it's a huge problem with our other students who wouldn't necessarily fail if they were given the correct instruction, if they were given targeted, systematic, structured, sequential language. And I think, the issue I'm hearing about in Ethiopia and Gad, I've been so fortunate to work in your country, and you're right that we do have pockets of individuals who are acutely aware of the need to change the way in which they instruct students, not just those with dyslexia, but actually all students, because you have these students who are victims of theoretical zombies. They are provided instruction by teachers who don't know what they don't know. And I've been so fortunate to work with teachers in so many countries. I have yet to meet a teacher who is not here because they love working with students and they want to teach. They really do. Teachers want to know what to do, but they don't know what they don't know. So usually by the time they get in the profession, they're scrambling with trying to provide whatever they can. And regardless of the country that they're teaching in, they're grasping at whatever resources are available to them, if they're so fortunate to have resources available to them. I'm hearing this story in Ethiopia, and I would suspect it's similar to, Gad, you may remember some cohorts we had of teachers in Cairo, where, the situations they shared with the challenges in even accessing the most basic resources so that they can create something for the students. Even that is a challenge for them. So, I know that we have huge issues in Canada. It's more than dyslexia, it's also dyslexia. I know that those people in who are educators don't like that term, and I say, well, okay, do something different about it. Stop using these resources that are theoretical zombies, that use things that are ineffective, and go and learn, and hopefully they can get something to help them to provide better instruction with students. You don't have to have a fancy program. You have to have a teacher who understands the language in which they're instructing. They have to understand the components of the language. They have to understand that phonemic awareness and phonics instruction and vocabulary doesn't have to be linked to English if that's the primary language. I mean, you're speaking of all the languages that you're dealing with, and I know that we have over 200 languages reported as being spoken in Canadian homes, but only 2 official languages in Canada. And we have trouble, and we've got English, and we're the attic apartment over the United States where they've got scads of research. And it's just not happening in Canada and in so many countries around the world. So I'm so encouraged to see people like you who are each making efforts in countries around the world to change not only our understanding of dyslexia, but to support educators so that they can better instruct all learners, because all will profit from better instruction. It's just that our dyslexic students absolutely need it.
Corey, you mentioned just now that in Canada, I think you have 200 languages that are being spoken at homes. And certainly the multilingual nature of different countries is making an impact on the learning of reading, right? And I think Abe you said 80 languages in Ethiopia. but you
Yes.
have developed one assessment tool. Would you like to tell us more about that? I mean, in view of the lingual nature of Ethiopia, how is this single assessment tool working for you?
So what we have, for instance, in my organization is we have basic screening tools for at least 5-6 major languages. But for Amharic, which is the federal working language, which has established itself as a dominant language historically, etc., is a Semitic language which uses alpha syllabary writing system, like a bit of Arabic and Hebrew. We have like many languages with that kind of linguistic structure, Semitic origin. We also have languages which belong to what we call Cushitic languages, and we also have Omotic languages and Nilo-Saharan, etc. languages. So it's not just the number. Even the linguistic structure of these languages are vary. It's extremely diverse. So when you want to develop a screening or an assessment tool, the first thing you need to know is you need to understand the linguistic, the structure, the phonemes, and even the grammatical, the morphological, morphophonemic aspect of those languages, such that you could develop, for instance, assessment tool, to assess the phonemic awareness, letter identification, word reading, etc., etc. So, given the challenge, the resource constraints we have at FANA, and even the expertise, we have not yet able to produce assessment tools for many of these languages which have already been reduced into writing system. Apart from that, in addition to the resource constraints, we also have, challenge related to, understanding of the issue of, earlier, before I spoke about, for instance, about this huge, massive, low literacy ecosystem in the country. And when we approach teachers, school administrators, policymakers, and talk about dyslexia, we tell them that, okay, forget about dyslexia. We can talk about reading, proper reading instruction for all students. And we are trying to inject proper, explicit reading instruction. We are trying to inject these instructions into the curriculum so that, children with dyslexia could also benefit when the other students benefit. So the kind of approach we're using at the moment is the approach, one that works for many of the children. In between, these children with dyslexia also benefit. So back to the assessment tool, we have all these limitations, linguistic and orthographic systems, etc. So at the moment, we have mother tongue educations written in local languages. We also have the federal working language, which uses a different writing system from many of the languages which are introduced in the education system. And also we have English, which uses this, I'm sorry, crazy kind of spelling system, because
Not wrong.
No, I didn't mean literally, but it's very challenging. The English spelling system is extremely difficult for us because English is a foreign language for us, and these kids are struggling, with the writing system of their own, let alone this exotic, foreign, and inconsistent. French is probably the worst, or worse, at least worse than English. So these children have to transit from their native language to the federal working language, which is Amharic, which uses a different writing system, and they have to translate to English, which so a child which is taught, for instance, C is K in his own language or C is Ch in his own language, later he will be introduced, no, C is K in English. He was taught the same letter representing another sound in his own language. When he comes to grade 2, grade 3, his English teacher tells him, no, the C, A, B, C, the C is K, K for cat. No, I was told this letter represents her in my language. So this transition is not even considered when, when languages or speakers of languages devise their orthographies. One of the things that they need to consider is making sure that the transition from the local languages to English, because sooner or later, they are going to learn English anyway at a tertiary level, at high school level, etc. So English is going to wait for them, whether they like it or not. And it is an internationally established language. So one of the things they may need to consider is like the transition from the local writing system to English is smooth. The transition from local language to the federal working language, which they have to speak and use at a national level. So these are the kind of challenges we have in order to develop assessment systems for many of the languages. But we are still working on the issue.
Well, Canada has 200 spoken languages, Ethiopia 80. How many languages is spoken in Vietnam? Kem Hung or Hop, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, actually, we have a lot of minor ethnic language. However, for the written language, we have not much. So the Vietnamese language is the main language now using in the school. So actually, we have the difficulties, but we do not have to face the big difficulties like in Ethiopia or Canada, actually.
Actually, we have 54 minority group, but we focus only on the national language, Vietnamese language, and maybe in the future we focus more on minority group language, maybe.
And Gad, I mean, we were talking about assessment tools, and I know that you have a special interest in developing assessment tools. Yeah, would you like to share more on that?
Yes, I've been fascinated by assessment, and funny enough, I've only given a lecture yesterday about this Siang in a local one of the American university in Cairo, talking to senior psychology students who are studying cognitive psychology about assessment and the importance of assessment. And I just noticed the first paper I wrote about this was in 2006, so almost 20 years ago, about dyslexia in Arabic. I've been fascinated by this because I really believe you can't really operationalize dyslexia, and you can't really front up and help students unless you have tools to identify them. And the tools must be culturally fair and must be linguistically appropriate. And that's why I've been always fascinated. Even my PhD was actually diagnostic. The title of my PhD was devising a diagnostic tool in Arabic can enrich our understanding of dyslexia. That's the whole idea. So I've spent some years in the UK, sort of leading a group of fellow researchers. I think fortunate Corey was one of them helping us with the developing an intervention tool in Arabic based on the OG principles. So it's a fascinating project. But I had another group, and we've developed six nationally standardized tests, Siang, in Kuwait. Kuwait is a small country, small Gulf country, so you can do this, and they are relatively wealthy, so they give us some money, and I've put a group together, and we've developed a test of reading and spelling. I was very happy, very proud of that. Actually, I was the first author, because believe it or not, across the whole entire Arab world is made up of 22 countries. That's the only single nationally standardized test of reading. For some bizarre reason, we don't have nationally standardized test of reading in Egypt. That's a country of 109 million. We have a lot of criterion reference that, well, not a lot even. I just produced one. And for some reason, we are producing cognitive tests. So we have WISC-4 in Egypt, we have Stanford Binet, we have test of memory, but we have no test of Arabic language reading. We have no test of phonological processing, which is the biggest predictor of reading in our language, in Arabic. So we're really a dearth so I've produced some test of phonological processing, test of working memory. We've also produced a test of orthography and morphological processing, which is what Ab was referring to as an important predictor. And then since I moved to Egypt in 2017, I've developed with my colleague John Everett a dyslexia screener in Arabic. So I'm very proud of that. And it's nationally standardized across the Arab world. And the screener takes only 45 minutes, and it looks at children from grade 2 till grade 6, utilizing technology. You just need someone to be there with them, but they will do all of the work themselves. You just register the child and whatever. And we're trying to promote it now, and we try to explain to people and see how they can benefit from it. So that was a component of the assessment. I've also, while I've been in Egypt, since I've been in Egypt for the last 6 or 7 years, I've also produced a diagnostic placement test. You know, the criterion reference, you get the scope and sequence for the Ministry of Education, and then you develop a placement test so you can know, because dyslexia is a developmental disorder. It's a disorder of development. So they can actually read. The problem is they are not reading according to their grade level. They are not reading according to their age. So you really have to identify the gap. It's all about the gap identification, because in order to help them, you have to say how far behind are they? Is it a year? Is it 2 years or 2.5 years or whatever? So placement testing and finding out their exact level, that would really help you in order to start the intervention. So I produced that in Egypt. And I'm calling upon other countries in the Arab world. I'm trying to encourage them in the Emirates, discussion in Saudis now. You need to develop this so you can actually identify those with dyslexia and those with learning disorders as well. And internationally, Siang, I've also been very fortunate because the question is about assessment. I've collaborated with IDA. I've tabled the idea for them, and we've got a group together, and we say we need to develop, in order to assess dyslexia, you need standards. You need standards because there's so many people around the world that are diagnosing dyslexia differently. There are different professionals involved, different standards. So what we need IDA to help us. So we put a team of experts together. We spent about 4 or 5 years, and we've developed actually an assessment standards for dyslexia that's been approved by the IDA. So we've done that 3 years ago, and then I moved to the Learning Disability Association of America, the LDA, and we thought, okay, what is good enough for dyslexics is actually good enough for those with LDs, especially the dysgraphics and the dyscalculia. And we did the same job, and we've got a team together. I'm fortunate to work with Elsa Cardenas-Hagen and Eric Treidis and other experts from the US. And we've also developed standardized, that's been published and adopted by the learning disability. So now there is guidelines and standards if you'd like to assess. So I'm very passionate about this. I hope we can develop the same assessment standards across the Arab world, maybe one day.
Well, we do hope that will come soon. Well, we've talked about resources, we've talked about different languages, we've talked about assessment tools. I just wanted to touch on the topic of social stigma, because I think, Hop, in your sharing, you mentioned that social stigma continues to be significant amongst students and parents. How are you guys addressing that in Vietnam?
Well, thank you for your comment and question, Mr. Lian Singh. Let me say a little bit more clear about that point. In Vietnam, language disorders, autism spectrum disorder, and specific learning disorders may be put in group 6, named other disability. Such disorders just receive disability certificates when in severe level, and then diagnosed by provincial hospital, and then applied by parent to the commune council for getting benefits from supporting policy. The stigma seems not come from the community or school, but parents do not happy with the labor disability for their child. For hidden disability like language learning disorders or dyslexia, then they even feel ashamed of of that disorder labor. It had better to label at a lazy or poor learning rather than disorder or disability. But as I mentioned before, just students with a disability certificate then get priority policy. Just disability certificate. So that's the problem. Maybe from the feeling of parents. Maybe not come from the community or school. That's from my perspective. Yeah, Dr. Hyun can add some information.
Yes, Kem Hong, would you like to supplement what Hop just said?
Yes, that is the real situation in our society. Because now, up to now, to our law of the person with disabilities by the government, the name of the specific learning disorder or autistic spectrum disorder are not exactly named. They call the other disability, so it is quite difficult for us to do the certification for the student with dyslexia. So as my personal experience, the stigma is not from the society, as Dr. mentioned, because up to now we do many activities to improve and increase like the attitude and the knowledge of the society about the disabilities, and also to the children with the dyslexia and the specific learning disorder. They not only have the difficulties, they also have the strength. So now in our school, we focus on learning active learning, and we focusing on develop the children's competency, the abilities. So when we have some children with risks of the dyslexia, we also focus on their strength, and we give advice for the parents that we should focus not only to support the weakness, but also to develop the strength. So the stress of the parents will not too much high, and the stigma from the school, from the students, among the students with dyslexia is not much high, but the problem will be more problem when the children with dyslexia become the junior high school student, when they have the social problems. Yeah, that is the social behavioral problems. That is also the area we are now trying to focusing on in supporting and in studying the social behavior problems of the children with dyslexia.
Kem Hong, you mentioned earlier that it's important to emphasize the strengths of those with dyslexia, and I would like to return to that shortly. But first of all, I think there's a question on the chat. In Ethiopian schools, how can we address, I assume, social stigma, since I don't think the teacher has any information about students who have dyslexia. Abe, would you like to comment on that question?
Yeah, I just replied in the text to Magdi, who is, I think, listening to us from Ethiopia. I just referred her to our website and provided her with contact details of our team, so she can talk to us and learn more about how we are trying to better this situation. So as not to take my time responding to her. Magdi, there is an organization working, an Ethiopian-based organization, which is called FANA, working on these issues. So you can call and discuss with us, or you can visit our website, learn more about our work. Thank you.
Well,
Siang.
if you have any questions, do write in, because we're going to come to the end of this
Yes.
panel very shortly. I think that's what Deborah was about to
That's what
prompt
I'm
me on.
trying to prompt you. We're well and truly
But-
over our time.
Right, but do we have time just to comment about strengths, Deborah?
Why not? People,
Yes, because-
people stay if
and
they want to
also-
listen. Yes.
And also, I'm going to ask you to comment about strengths, because
Oh,
Deborah is with the Dyslexia Strengths group,
yes.
right? And we think that
Yes.
it's so important. Although these individuals have difficulties with reading and spelling, they do have talents, they do have strengths.
That's correct.
And we should be emphasizing those. So, Deborah,
Well,
please.
one of the things that we know about our students is that they struggle so hard to learn, but ultimately, especially when they get older and as adults and they enter into tertiary education, they enter into education that it's something that they love doing. It's something they probably feel like it's easy for them to do. And in a lot of ways, they do better than their non-dyslexic peers. But the problem is they've got to get there. They've got to be able to have the fortitude and the confidence to be able to advocate not only for themselves and have the support group around them to be able to get them there. So one of the things that we want to raise awareness of is the fact that students, even though, outwardly, especially when they're very young, like Hop said, they're lazy and they get labeled lazy and they're not trying hard enough. It's not that. It's the fact that, they need specialist teaching like Corey's talked about today, and who in the best place to be able to influence teachers is Hop and Cam Huang, who are in the education university, who are training teachers, and hopefully they're making sure that there's modules in there about learning differences. And like, this is one of the biggest things. If, like Corey said, if you don't know, you don't know. You just continue to do what you do. And unless you enlighten those who are supposed to be supporters and being able to help these kids along. So yes, strengths is something that makes these kids successful. Doing something that they love, doing something that they feel good at, and it can be anything, anything. So as long as they can utilize that talent to do something in life, and they have supporters around them, entrepreneurs. A lot of there's a higher level of entrepreneurs who are dyslexic, and they just hire the accountant and the administrator, and they just go on with their really cool ideas and create wonderful businesses. But they just hire people that they're weak in the areas that they're weak in. But anyway, yes. So, today we have, I'm just saying today, listening to this conversation today, it is the solutions here are so complex. What we've had from around the world is such a complex situation. And so, and we're very lucky. I'm just sitting here in awe of you all. You're in positions to make such a significant difference in the lives of children who learn differently. So I'm really blessed to be part of your lives, and the fact that we've been able to share today. It's just been really, really. I'm very blessed to have you in my life, and I'm sure.
Well, Deborah has 3 children with learning differences, so she
Yes.
knows how
Yeah.
it feels, and very well.
So
Just to demonstrate the strengths of those with dyslexia, I think Abe has a painting that he wants to share.
yes.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether you can.
Yes, you are sharing. That's right. Yep, we are seeing it.
Okay. Let me just expand this. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes, we can all see it.
Yes, we can see.
Yeah, this painting is by one of this bright kid, young man who has dyslexia. And this guy had some mental health issues because nobody understood him. He struggled at school. So eventually his parents took him to a mental health facility, and the doctor told him that he had depression. So he was clinically depressed because of dyslexia. So his parents at some point decided that, okay, in order for you to have some space, you better go to our parents who are living in countryside. So he goes to his grandparents, place in the countryside, and he meets this girl in the neighborhood who seemed very, down, depressed as well. And he talks to her, and she tells him that, she didn't have parents, and she's also living with her grandmother who was impoverished. So some couple from America goes to that village, and they promised her that they would take her to America, knowing her background. And because of some government issues, adopting a child was banned. And she was not feeling herself. She could not accept the life that she has in the countryside, and she could not even get the kind of life, the American life that she's been dreaming of. So he just drew this, painted this and showed her. And he told her that, this is about a girl who is living in two worlds. Even the color of her skin is partly the one who is living in the rural area, it is darker. The one who is, imagining to live in America is a bit lighter. So this is a painting which he called the two-worlded girl. So this is just one of the, the examples showing that kids with dyslexia also have this kind of imaginative and creative work. That's it.
And I think with that
Thank you.
incredible story, we will
It is
call
incredible.
today's, yes. Let's call the this panel session
So speaking
to
of
an end.
strength, I just wanted
Yes.
to share that.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today. It's just been a wonderful conversation, and we still have many attendees here that have wanted to stay on to listen to what you've had to say. Our next international forum will be held at our Unite conference in June. So if you want to know anything about what we do at Unite, you're quite welcome to use the link. Also, anybody who's left, we'd love to hear what you have to say. We'd love your feedback on the International Forum. And so if you could use the link, we'd appreciate it. Siang, over to you. Any last words?
Well, actually, the last words I would like to say is just reading out this comment that came in. Babe says, I don't have a question, but just feel very heartened that countries represented in today's panel are coming together to leverage on common goals to support their communities with persons with learning challenges. Please keep up the great work you are all doing. And I think that's a great message for all of us.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you the next
Thank you
time.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Lovely meeting
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Thank you, everyone.
Forward to seeing all of you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.